Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this lecture. My name is Classic Jean Mendiat. I'm researcher and lecturer at the University of Rwanda. For today's lecture, I prepared this presentation on best practice examples and challenges regarding to safe vehicles. And this lecture today is part of the safe vehicles training from the TransSafe project. This lecture is divided in three main parts. In the first part, we're going to discuss the existing safe vehicle standards, and these safe vehicle standards are divided into two different levels. One at a more international level, and second at a regional level, at the African region level. And then, after discussing this, we're going to see in the second part of this lecture to see how Rwanda, which safe vehicle standards Rwanda is implementing, and also after understanding which safe vehicle standards Rwanda is implementing, we're going to the third part of this lecture to see what is the challenges that Rwanda is facing in order to implement those safe vehicle standards. In the first part of this lecture, we are going to discuss, as I mentioned earlier, about the existing safe vehicle standards. And in this slide is a compilation of the existing safe vehicle standard at the international level. Here we compiled the most important vehicle regulations that make a change in road safety. So these are organized in four main groups. The first group is about safe driving, the second group is about crash avoidance, the third group is about crash protection, and the last group is about post-crash protection. Continuing here with the vehicle safety standard at the international level, here in this slide, I'm presenting the standard, the vehicle standard, safety standards defined by the UN. So according to the UN, they've defined 6 different standards. But let me highlight one in particular here, which I found very interesting. Is about the pedestrian protection. So this standard mainly they advise the vehicles manufacturers in order to include technology that can easily detect the presence of vulnerable road users such as pedestrians and cyclists. And with these feature, vehicles can be able to avoid crashes with this group of road users. And now, after discussing those two vehicle safety standard at the international level, the one which is mainly a compilation of the existing standard at the international level, and the second, which is a vehicle safety standard defined by the UN. Now we are going to discuss the vehicle safety standard at the regional level, at the African region level. So these vehicle safety standards were extracted from the African Road Safety Charter. So here, when it comes to safer vehicles, so the standard predicts 5 main different standards. So let me highlight here the number 2 and number 3. Why these two? Because these two are very popular in different African countries. It shows that these two standards are widely used or widely followed in different African countries. I'm not saying that the other standards are not used. Yes, the other standards are used, but these two in particular are very popular in many African countries. So when you look for the number 2, it says that they need to formulate a restriction regarding to the age of vehicles imported. And number 3 says that it's a mandatory to reinforce, or is a mandatory or need to reinforce the periodic vehicles inspection in the country. And let's see where Rwanda falls according to the UN vehicle safety standard, we see that Rwanda meets in between 0 to 1 standard. It shows that Rwanda is able to satisfy very few standards according to the UN. But if you look for this map here, you see that it's not only the case of Rwanda. You find that most of the countries, most of the African countries, they don't satisfy most of the standards, vehicle safety standards according to the UN. Only few countries like South Africa down here in the south, and Egypt up there in the north of Africa are the few African countries which satisfy most of the standards according to the UN. Yes, so let's see what Rwanda is able to satisfy. So now we are looking for the best practice. So when we look for the best practice, we start here with the inspection of vehicles. We see that in Rwanda, they're also responding for this standard, which is the inspection of vehicles. And we see that in Rwanda, there are so many facilities for vehicles inspection. And according to the local regulation, the commercial vehicles are required to undergo a testing every 6 months, while no commercial vehicle they are required to undergo a testing every 1 year. So it means that the commercial vehicles they take twice this test per year, while non-commercial vehicles they take once a year. But also at these facilities, they have a lot of equipment, and also they perform many different tests in Rwanda. So one of them is a brake roller test. They also have here the suspension tester, but also the CO2 gas analysis. So these the kind of these different equipment testing equipment they have in their facility, which perform many different tests, and this just to ensure that all the vehicles in the roads of Rwanda are safer. So are vehicles that do not contribute for road accident. But also another best practice in Rwanda is about the seat belt. You see that in Rwanda, all passengers, all drivers should use seat belt. So this is a compulsory. You cannot drive in Rwanda's roads without using seat belt, either for driver, even also for passenger. All of them should use seat belt. This is very important. Yes, when it comes to these incentives to promote electric vehicles, we found that in Rwanda there's a huge movement of introducing electric vehicles in Rwanda. I brought this picture of this local company which is transforming the existing motorbikes in Rwanda into electric ones. And this also is kind of initiative that not only contribute to reduce CO2 emission, but also into open a room to bring new technology to those old motorcycles, which might also contribute to have a safer vehicles in Rwanda, to have a safer motorcycles in Rwanda. That's why such kind of initiatives they find a very open room in Rwanda. And this open room, might say, because of these incentives that they might find in the country, we have two sets of incentives. We have fiscal incentive and non-fiscal incentives. When it comes to the fiscal incentive, we find that if those people or people owning electric vehicle, if they want to import any spare part to the country, they find that they're going to import it at a very low tax, which is very good incentive for people to use this kind of vehicles. So when it comes to the non-fiscal incentives, find that in Rwanda they give more priority, especially for parking for people using electric vehicles, which is also quite good incentive, especially for those willing to drive through the inner city, where it's always congested, where it's always lacking places for parking. So then, if you're giving this priority to park because you're on electric vehicle, it is a quite good incentive. Another good example, another best practice I want to share is about helmet wearing. So Rwanda is one of the low income country in Africa, which helmet wearing is compulsory. It means that when you're riding in Rwanda's roads, it's compulsory. When you're riding a motor, it's compulsory to wear helmet. And this you can see in the society. You find even motor taxi passengers, everybody in Rwanda wears helmet, which is amazing, which is a very good example which needs to be shared with other African countries. Beside of that, there are also a lot of challenges, right? Because if you look here, Rwanda in this green dot here, Rwanda is located, is an inland country, okay, and most of its neighbors, like neighboring countries like Tanzania, Uganda, but also Kenya is not a neighbor, but it's quite far. But you find that most of these countries, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, they drive on the opposite side from Rwanda. And since there's a huge inflow of trucks from these countries to Rwanda, so this become a huge challenge, huge challenge regarding to safe driving because you find drivers coming from one side that are used to drive on one side in their countries, and then they have to change their their driving sides in Rwanda. So this becomes a huge challenge. But also another challenge that we need to highlight is that since most of the people in Rwanda they wear helmets while riding a motor, we are not very sure about the quality or how safer or how far those helmets can protect in case of accident. So there's a huge need for certify the standards of the helmets in Rwanda to see at what extent they can be able to protect in case of road accident. So this is also a huge challenge that need to be addressed in Rwanda. And another challenge, which is also very important, is about the import age limits, which means the import of vehicles. And you see that in Rwanda, there are no restriction on the import, on the age of the vehicles imported. So it shows that the average age of the vehicle fleet in Rwanda is quite high, which also contributes a lot for road accidents. So there's a huge challenge to see how to limit the age of age limit of the vehicles imported to Rwanda. Well, to conclude, I'd like to highlight here four main points here. The first one is that say that there are still numerous vehicle safety standards, like those followed by countries like US, China, European countries, which are quite different from the standards defined by the United Nations, which are also quite different from the standards defined by the African Union, but also which are quite different from the standards each country each African country individually they are also defining. This shows clearly that in this presentation we discuss it from the, let's say, for a more complex set of standards going down up to standards defined at the local, at the regional level, which is the African Union standard, which are mainly the standard what most African countries like Rwanda they are following to ensure that the vehicles in their countries are safer. According to the UN, find that Rwanda satisfies very few vehicle safety standards, and most of those standards that Rwanda satisfies are regarding to vehicle inspection. And in addition, I want to say that Rwanda is doing a great job, especially when it comes to the helmet compliance and also promoting the use of electric vehicles. If you see, as we discussed it before, we find that in Rwanda, especially in the city of Kigali, all the motor taxi drivers, passengers, all of them, they wear helmet when on roads, which is quite a good example, amazing example, and need to be shared. But also, when you look for the use of electric vehicles, there's a huge movement, huge shift for the use of electric vehicles in Rwanda. These only do not only contribute to reduce the level of CO2 emission, but it also is a good opportunity to introduce technology that might turn those all the motorcycles into a motorcycle which are much safer. And we also highlighted a lot of challenges in Rwanda. So here I want just to highlight two. One of the challenge is regarding to helmet standards. As we said before, most of people wear helmets, but we don't know exactly at which extent those helmets they can really protect those motorcycle riders. But also another huge challenge is about the to limit the import of vehicles because as we discussed before, most in Rwanda is not defined. There are no clear definition or there are no definition on the limit of the imports, which also makes the city or the country to have a very huge fleet of old vehicles in Rwanda and therefore contributing for road accidents. So we see that this one is also a huge challenge that needs to be addressed in order to ensure that we still have more and more safe vehicles in Rwanda. We've reached the end of our presentation. I want to thank you for your time and I hope you enjoyed the issues that we discussed today. Once again, thank you so much and hope to see you next time. Bye bye.